So I say, sometimes provocatively, I say the 12 steps work 100% of the time. As long as you're able to penetrate into the deeper meaning of those steps and have the experience that's waiting for you there. But that's a big if. That's going to depend upon you and your willingness to do certain things. And of course, you're going to be under the influence, under the guidance of a teacher, someone we refer to as a sponsor. Michael, what's on your mind? What's in your heart?
Well, my query for you today, and as I mentioned, I'm coming off of doing the monthly sadhana practice virtually with you from Costa Rica. So I'm feeling all shined up and attuned and a clear vessel to channel this question to you. And it is, why the 12 steps and why now the 12 efforts?
Hmm.
Given that it's Recovery 2.0 and a progressive modality, you didn't necessarily, from my viewpoint, have to include a 12-step or 12 effort model as a centerpiece of Recovery 2.0, but reading through your book and watching the videos, it is very much there as a center foundational centerpiece.
Hmm.
So why is it still relevant, and why the progression into the 12 efforts?
Well, thank you so much for this inquiry. So let's begin with a little bit of history, a little context. We can speak about how the 12 efforts came into being, how that adaptation took place. And then we can dive in even deeper and look at what the call of the day is. What's required today? What's being asked for in our universe? What do we need? That's really the question. So quickly and briefly, the history of the 12 steps begins really in 1935. Actually, the complete history begins quite a bit before that. But in 1935, Bill W., the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, the co-founder, along with Dr. Bob, got together. And at that moment, Bill W. had already taken his final drink. And at that moment, Dr. Bob took his final drink. And the two of them came together for the first meeting, if you will. And that's popularly attributed as the beginning of Alcoholics Anonymous, June the 10th, 1935, when two people came together in the spirit of abstinence, sobriety, and then ultimately recovery. Over the next 4 years, these gentlemen worked with many, many, many people, wrote out the 12 steps, developed the 12 steps, and wrote the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And then in 1939, the book came out. And as they say, the rest was history. Arguably one of the most important books of the 20th century in terms of the effect it had on such a huge number of people. Hundreds of 12-step programs have adopted the 12 steps and adapted them. So for example, it started with Alcoholics Anonymous, but then there was Narcotics Anonymous. There's Al-Anon. There's Codependence Anonymous. There's Cocaine Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous. These days, you have things like Chronic Pain Anonymous, of course, Overeaters Anonymous, Families Anonymous, on and on. It goes on and on and on. There's so many groups that have adopted these 12 steps. Why? Because they work. Because there's a genius in there. Because there's a process, a delineated process of transformation that actually works to address specifically the problem of addiction in all of its forms in the human condition. So primarily, the first part of the answer to your question is, why the 12 steps still today in 2023? Because there's something in there that works. second part of that answer, second aspect of the first part of your question for me is why the 12 steps now, and why is that such a part of Recovery 2.0, or why is that a part at all? Because it worked for me. Because it was specific to my journey of recovery. And I set a foundation of recovery for myself first through the 12 steps. And by the 12 steps, I mean the work of going through the 12 steps themselves. Working with a sponsor, doing the reading and the writing and the exercises, engaging in the community as well, which is the fellowship, but that's different than working through the 12 steps. What's in the 12 steps that works? What's the magic that's there? Why or how going through this process, how does going through the 12 steps help a person to transform their life where they could seemingly overcome a condition that before the 12 steps almost nobody could overcome, which is to say alcoholism and addiction? The 12 steps are based on the concept of rigorous honesty. They become accessible to the person who becomes willing. That is to say, humble. Humble enough to start to investigate one's own life in a truthful way, in a rigorously honest way. The 12 steps include things like a personal inventory, where one has to look at one's life, one's past, and understand where things got off track. And rather than looking at one's life in terms of a series of plot points, this happened, and then that happened, and then this happened to me, and then that happened, the personal inventory asks us to look at our life through the lens of our resentments. Where have we held on to energy, negative energy? Where have we held on to anger? Where are we stuck in the past? Where are we drawn back into the past over and over again? Which is really what a resentment is, to feel over and over again. The 12 steps have a lot of action-oriented things one has to do. Not just do we have to read and write, we have to identify the damage that we've caused as a result of our addiction. Not only do we identify it, but we go through the process of becoming ready to let go of the parts of ourself which have been in the way of us living in a free, liberated state. We have to make reparation, amends. We have to present ourselves to the world and to people that we may have harmed as an amended person. And then there are maintenance steps, 10, 11, and 12, where we have to continue to do this work on a one day at a time basis, engage in prayer, engage in meditation. We're living a spiritual life. And at the end of all this work that we've done in the 12 steps, we realize it was really all about one thing. We were setting ourselves free, so we had the power, the ability, the presence, the strength, the wisdom to set somebody else free. That the whole time, this inventory process, this amends process, this letting go, surrendering process, this growing up, this waking up process, this spiritually connecting process was really all about readying us, preparing us to be of service to another person. And these days, people talk about the extremely poor success rates of the 12 steps. And I want to push back on that perception that the 12 steps have such a poor success rate. It's not that the 12 steps have a poor success rate. Because for the person who really in earnest goes through those steps, with a person who earnestly understands those steps, it almost always works. It almost always works. It's such a powerful process. Now that is so different from what you hear in the news and in articles and a lot of people who make commentary about the 12 steps, but have never had the experience that the 12 steps have to give. So I say, sometimes provocatively, I say the 12 steps work 100% of the time. As long as you're able to penetrate into the deeper meaning of those steps and have the experience that's waiting for you there. But that's a big if. That's going to depend upon you and your willingness to do certain things. And of course, you're going to be under the influence, under the guidance of a teacher, someone we refer to as a sponsor. And naturally, who you choose to be your sponsor is going to affect your experience with whether you're able to get into that inner wisdom and the inner essence of those steps. But if you are, and if you're blessed to come humble and open-minded and willing, and to work with a great teacher, a great sponsor, you're going to get it. And you're going to recover from addiction. At least you're going to set a foundation where your primary addiction, for me it was, for example, drugs and alcohol. I remember the day when I was about maybe 9 months into working the steps, and I woke up one day and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I thought about using drugs and alcohol. I couldn't even remember the last time. It wasn't that I was experiencing cravings and overcoming those cravings and therefore being successful in overcoming cravings. No. This was freedom. I wasn't beset by craving at all. I had been relieved of alcoholism. I had been relieved of drug addiction. That was now over 31 years ago. And I tell this to people who usually don't believe me completely. In 31 years, I've not had a single thought about using drugs and alcohol. Not once. I never went back from that day when I woke up and I realized, wow, I was once a person who couldn't imagine a day without drugs and alcohol. And I transformed myself, with a lot of help, into a person who couldn't imagine a day with drugs and alcohol. So this magical, mystical, amazing, spiritual thing happened for me. I changed my mind. I literally changed my mind. Or I could say, I entered a process which was transformational in nature. I did it to the best of my ability. I came humble and willing. I worked with a wise sponsor, or actually many wise sponsors. And I experienced liberation from drugs and alcohol, which were my primary addictions that I understood at that point in time. And then guess what? All the rest of life started to happen for me. I had work to do. I had living to live. I had a life to get to. And I was able to get to that life free from the thinking and the craving and the challenges of being in an addictive state of mind. I really, really was liberated from those addictions. So we'll start there. I can tell you that I had success in this way. And at the same time, I can tell you that the 12 steps are missing certain elements that I feel are important and become important at a certain point in a person's life. The 12 steps proclaim themselves as a spiritual program that achieve two things. They will help a person to build a relationship with a power greater than themselves, to tap into a greater power, and they will effectuate a spiritual experience in an individual. This is the stated purposes of the 12 steps. The 12 steps do not teach about meditation. They don't offer a way to deal with the physical body. They don't give instruction with regards to diet, for example. There's no instruction with regards to breath and breath work, which is so critically important and central. And so there are these very, very important, critically important aspects of living well, living optimally, achieving fulfillment, optimal health at the level of mind and body and spirit. The 12 steps helped to set a foundation, but there were certain things that the 12 steps didn't do. And that's sort of where Recovery 2.0 begins, the conversation about Recovery 2.0. People are like, well, why the 2.0? And I say, well, next level, or the next thing, or complementary to, or supplementing what is already there. And so Recovery 2.0 comes out of this need, which I was experiencing on a personal basis. And it was a need to address the mental, physical, spiritual, and even temporal, meaning relationship with time, needs that I had. I had been liberated from drugs and alcohol, for real. I had set a foundation for recovery in my life. And I almost feel like that was the first step. So I could say the 12 steps were really the first step. And then from there, I had to start to do other work, which was going to become appropriate for me at different levels that I was reaching and different needs that I was developing in my life as I grew older and as I awakened in certain ways. Another aspect of the 12 steps, which I recognized was a challenge for me and many, many other people, had to do with language. Critically important. So when I first got sober, when I first put down drugs and alcohol, and I stepped into 12-step meetings, I was told, well, to introduce yourself at a meeting, you raise your hand, you say your name, and you state whatever your addiction is. So I might say, my name's Tommy and I'm an alcoholic. Or my name's Tommy, I'm a drug addict and alcoholic. Or my name's Tommy, I'm an addict. And so that for me was appropriate at that time. I felt that I needed to say those words, and I felt that it was accurate to say those words because my experience had been exactly that. Wow, I really behave like an alcoholic. I am stuck in this drug addiction. And for a little while, for a good long while, it was really valuable for me to be humble enough to say that, like, hey, this is where I'm coming from. This is what I'm identifying with at this point in my development. But as I've said, different people need different things at different times. I definitely needed to express something different. As I moved along my path of recovery, what I now refer to as a path of discovery, I was moving forward in my life and I was healing. And so at a certain point, years down the road, I would raise my hand and say, my name's Tommy, I'm an addict. And it no longer felt accurate. It no longer felt empowering as it once had. It was empowering to say that in the beginning because there was a truth to it. There was a connection with that energy. It was valuable for me to say that that's where I am. But as I moved forward and I became healthy and I started to heal myself of addiction, those words no longer applied. It didn't work for me anymore. But this was a massive problem for me. because I had grown up in a society known as 12-step recovery, where you raise your hand, you say your name, and you express, I'm this, I'm that. Well, now that was in direct conflict with my heart and my soul. This was not correct. I wasn't trying to be arrogant, like, oh, I'm different from everybody else in the room in some way. I was very aware that when I said those words, I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic, it was not true for me. I needed new language. This was right at a time when I had dedicated my life to yoga. I'd been involved with yoga for many, many years. And yoga was providing for me something that worked on the mind, worked on the body, worked on the breath, worked on my stress, worked on diet. Yoga actually worked as an approach to every area of my life. And when taken in combination with 12-step work, I found it to be extremely powerful, and it could go toe-to-toe with addiction and help a person to overcome addiction and upgrade their life. And so I think it was that work of waking up and growing up through yoga, through the path of yoga, that really brought me to a place where I could no longer say, I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic. So that's a very personal story about language. And I don't have to keep it to the personal, because how many thousands upon thousands of people, maybe millions, have said to themselves, and so many of them have said to me and other people like me, why do you always proclaim yourself as in recovery? Why do you always proclaim yourself as I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic? I don't want to do that. Or people have looked at the 12 steps and they've seen that word God, 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 and they think, my God, I'm joining a religious cult. So the languaging has been a barrier to entry for people. Words, the power of words. And so there I was, after so many years of recovery, after so many hundreds of conversations about this, I woke up in the middle of the night one night in Costa Rica in 2019. And it was one of those moments where you're so sure you're not going back to bed. You know what I mean? It's one of those, okay, it's 2:00 in the morning, but I'm not even the slightest bit drowsy. I'm awake. I got up. My wife was next to me. I didn't want to bother her. I got up. I went into the bathroom. I closed the door to the bathroom. I got down onto the floor. And the thought came into my mind, rewrite the 12 steps. Just rewrite the 12 steps. Do it. Do it as an exercise. Nothing has to come of it. Just rewrite. So what would I do? I would exchange the word consciousness for the word God, or the word universe for the word God. I would strip out any gender reference. I would try to create an even more inclusive, even more empowering language that in the year 2019, people who struggled around language could embrace this new language. It wasn't because I thought there was something wrong with the 12 steps. I could just see that the language was a challenge for some. And if we could adjust that language, maybe those people could access that genius of the 12 steps and be lifted up into that place of freedom from their core addictions, just like I had been. Maybe they could experience that freedom. And so I was compelled and excited and inspired to do it. And so I wrote what became known as the 12 efforts, which is really the 12 steps according to Recovery 2.0. And so as an example, we could just take the first step. The original first step of Alcoholics Anonymous was we admitted we were powerless over alcohol or addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. I wrote in the first effort, we admitted we had been stuck in patterns of belief and behavior that no longer served us, that we had been cut off from the power of consciousness. And right there in that first declaration, that first statement for us in Recovery 2.0 was the idea that we'd been stuck in something and we could admit that. It was easier for us to understand that we had been stuck in patterns of belief and behavior that were not serving us. It was a lot different of a declaration than I was powerless over alcohol, which creates certain misunderstandings and certain confusion for people. For example, sometimes people extend that powerlessness into everything in life. I'm powerless to do anything. Actually, there's things that one can do. There are actions that one can take. But right there in that first declaration, we were setting people up to be able to see. The challenge, as we saw it, was being separate from consciousness. A religious person might say, you mean it's just separate from God? And I would say, yes, that's exactly what we mean. So they might say, well, why didn't you just say God? And I say, it's not about that word one way or another. It's about how somebody interprets that word. It's about how that word might get in the way of somebody moving forward down a path that could actually heal them, help them heal from something like addiction. So we were creating an openness, hopefully a gateway was opening with new language so that someone in the modern age might recognize, this isn't necessarily about powerlessness in the sense of there's nothing I can ever do, but it's really very much about stuckness, and the stuckness that's related to being in a pattern of belief and behavior that doesn't serve you any longer. And that we were cut off from the power of consciousness meant we better be talking in these next 11 efforts about how we're going to reconnect with that consciousness and access more power. So basically, I tried to preserve the spirit of the 12 steps because it had been so powerful for me, because there's so much genius in there, because I feel that everyone in the world should do a fourth step inventory. I believe everyone in the world would benefit from looking at their resentments where they hold on to the past. I believe everyone in the world should make amends for the things that they've done which missed the mark, mistakes that we've all made. I think it would be a better world if we all did that. And so as Recovery 2.0 is so based in the practice and principles of yoga, I started to understand, if you look at yoga as union, and you look at addiction as disconnection, yoga by definition is the antidote. Yoga by definition is the antidote to addiction. And that would mean that the 12-step path is a path of yoga. And if you brought in other elements of yoga, you could make it a complete path that could serve you for the rest of your life, in every area of your life, in every area and level of your being, at the level of mind and body and spirit and time. That we could learn how to become present by releasing the past. That we could improve upon all of our relationships, the relationship with self, the relationship with others, our relationship with spirit. That we could live in a body that was free from chronic pain, in a mind that was free from worry and stress and anxiety and depression and all of it. And that we could work one day at a time to be liberated from addictive states of consciousness where we had been stuck in patterns of belief and behavior that no longer served us. Some people come and say, well, do I have to practice yoga? And I know what they're saying. They're saying, do I need to get onto a yoga mat and do physical yoga postures? And I would say to that person, it's extremely beneficial if you do. But that's not what I mean when I talk about the word yoga. Yoga is so much more than those physical postures. So, do you have to practice yoga in order to do the 12 steps? Well, if you're doing the 12 steps, you are practicing yoga. It's just a question of which aspects of yoga do you want to bring into the process that can create an even more powerful transformation, an even deeper healing process to deliver you to a sense of fulfillment, health, and wellness on a one day at a time basis. That's the question. You're doing yoga by my definition of yoga, which is union, the movement towards disconnection into integration, from darkness to light, from confusion to clarity. This is yoga. And so why the 12 steps in the beginning? Why now? Because they work. Are they the only thing that works? Of course not. Nobody here is saying that. But they worked for me. And then I saw that there were problems in language, and I saw that there were a few things missing. And I thought, well, let's fill in some of the gaps. Let's dig into the very deep and powerful well of yoga, breath work, and meditation. Let's bring diet into this and a yogic approach to diet, which simply means awareness around diet. And let's work on calming the mind. Let's work on building our intuition. Let's work on greater states of consciousness and awareness. And let's use yoga in a comprehensive way so that we can make recovery comprehensive, even more effective, so that we can make those 12 steps even more effective, and so that we can overcome addiction and thrive in every area of our lives. So that's a bit of an explanation as to why I still advocate for the 12 steps, particularly the 12 efforts of Recovery 2.0, and why we are doing things the way that we're doing them. I'd love to know, if you wouldn't mind, Michael, what comes up for you as you hear me exploring your inquiry, your very important inquiry?
Thank you, Tommy. Well, lots of things. One thing that comes up for me, in terms of why the 12 steps, is the serenity prayer and the power to change the things that I can. And I think for me, that is what the 12 steps are all about. I can't change other people's behavior. I can't change circumstances of life beyond my control. But what I can change is looking at my part in it and taking responsibility for that and making amends and trying to do something about it. I did work the 12 steps in earnest with a very solid sponsor in AA, and went out for a bit and came back to, or not back to, came into Recovery 2.0, seeking something, a new paradigm, if you will. And I have a background in yoga, and I was very attracted to the yoga and progressive spirituality and nutrition and psychology and that holistic approach and the universal recovery approach. And I think you hit the nail on the head with language as a key difference. And I have listen to you kind of dance around the language in terms of, well, if you get stuck around the word God, generator, organizer, destroyer, or if you get stuck around insanity, sanus meaning health, and you're out of health. So you have given these tips and tricks if you get stuck with the original language, how to get beyond that block. But words are powerful, as we both know, and I really appreciate the subtle but powerful and meaningful shift in language from the word God to universe, which opens it up to that higher power of your own understanding that was there from the beginning, and opens it up to universal recovery and the unconscious patterns of belief and behavior. um, it gets to that compassionate view of not why the addiction, but why the trauma and why the pain that led to the addiction. And one place that I often got stuck with the word was the word defect, and kind of that negative connotation. It always made me think of like the Rankin and Bass Christmas cartoons from the 50s and 60s, and Rudolph and the elf getting stranded on the island of misfit toys, the
Mm,
thrown away toys, the defects. We're a couple of defects. We're a couple of misfits. I'm an alcoholic. What's wrong with me? I'm broken.
mm,
Throw me away to this island. I'm no good anymore. But instead, it's these are maladaptive behaviors. We use them to adapt to a painful situation. Um, so there's a reason for them, but they're not working anymore. So how can we kind of shed them and instead welcome in adaptive and healthy behaviors?
mm.
So I appreciate all of those things, and I also appreciate the backstory. So I'm a media arts teacher, so I'm envisioning the life story of Tommy Rosen and the jungle night in Costa Rica, and getting the divine spark, and
Mm.
with the howler monkeys and oceans in the background, and writing down the 12 efforts. So I appreciate that backstory, that visual. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. I'm super grateful for this inquiry, and I because of what you just said, I need to make a couple comments there quickly. So this concept of defect, the defects of character is how it's used in the original 12 steps. We had these defects of character. For some people, those words are going to work, and it's not offensive. For other people, those words are going to be triggering and make them feel like they're defective. Oh, I'm defective, just like I've been told my whole life, is how some people have said to me. Like, I've been told I'm defective my whole life, and I'm not going to come to this program and have it tell me that I'm defective again. It's triggering, and I would explain to that person that it's not meant in that way. It's meant to set you free from the feeling of being defective. But I would say this, interestingly, I want to be on the island of misfit toys. I actually want to be on that island over any other place, because I recognize in a healthy way, in a very healthy way, I don't fit in here into what people consider to be normal. And thank God. Thank God. Because who wants to be that? As Krishnamurti, the great, great philosopher, said, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to an extremely sick society. And who would want to be that? I actually don't want to make it here. I want to be sent to the island of misfit toys. That's where I was sent, by the way. I feel we've all been sent to that island. So if we can get past the idea that defective means less than, and more embrace it as defective means different than, we see the world differently than others. We see and feel things differently than others. That's a great place to be, and it's the end of shame when you can start to think this way. There's no more shame around, oh my God, I'm defective. No. The way we put it is in the 12 efforts, we put it as when we made mistakes. What person can't relate to that? I mean, as a human being, we know we're going to make mistakes. That's part of the deal. That's actually how we learn. So I no longer consider, that word it just wasn't appropriate. So we took it out and we replaced it with this concept of, well, we make mistakes, so we quickly correct those mistakes. We work on that, but we work on it from the island of misfit toys, where we've all been sent. And isn't it great that we get an opportunity to be who and what we actually are, and to have found each other, and to be inspiring and inspired enough to grow a circle like the one we're sitting in right now, and to have life and the challenges of the human condition make sense. Not because we were or had been addicts, but because we had developed a sensibility. We had developed a capacity for honesty where we could share at a very deep level in a circle like this and accept each other and listen to each other and not try to fix each other, but really listen and learn from each other's direct experience from this island of misfit toys where we all had been sent. And I just want to come out on record and say I'm so proud to be a member of that circle. I'm so happy to be on that island, and I wouldn't want to get off. And I'd really like to help people overcome any of the hurdles presented by language, so that whatever path you're on that leads to your own truth or your own healing, that the language that we choose is going to be empowering language for you. It's going to be correct for you. It makes sense for you. On our retreats with Recovery 2.0 at our meetings, if you want to raise your hand and say, my name's so-and-so, I'm an addict, you're going to be accepted just the same as somebody says, my name's so-and-so and I'm on a path of discovery, which is the language I use now. It doesn't matter to me. It just matters to you. And to be able to provide language that you can feel your way into and say, well, let me try this on for size. That's an exploration that I think is worth having. So anyway, Michael, thank you so much for the inquiry. I'm so grateful to you. So grateful to you for this.
Thank you, Tommy. I'm grateful too. And before I go, if I may, I just also wanted to share my gratitude and experience for the other aspect I forgot to mention, which is the big book tells you that you kind of hit upon, tells you to meditate, but I'm finding more instruction in Recovery 2.0 in how to meditate. And I'm redoing the 12 efforts, the 12 steps, and I'm on step 5. And I was feeling really stuck. I was having problems with saucha, the yogic concept of keeping your place clean, and the whole procrastination aggravation. And it was really getting to me. And I had done the 5th step with my sponsor, that intellectual step exercise. But then I went back to the 12 effort step guide, and I did the ancestral clearing prayer that was offered with the Recovery 2.0 program. And I did the breath for the negative mind meditation. And it was exactly what I needed. It really just shifted my whole energy and outlook in kind of a physical, spiritual, embodied, energetic level that really helps. So thank you for that.
Well, you're speaking my language now, and I love it so much. I can't even tell you. You make my day when you talk about that transformation that you've had. So I'm so delighted, Michael, and I'm right with you. And I'm so glad we walk this path shoulder to shoulder.
Thank you so much, Tommy.
Much love.